A mythos like Bugatti doesn't happen by itself. It's created by extraordinary people. Bringing Bugatti and Rimac together made so much sense for everyone.
With the Chiron, we are marking the pinnacle of the entire automotive industry. There is no car that is more exclusive, faster, more prestigious than this one.
A number appeared that was never meant to exist in the world of hypercars. 109,000 miles on a Bugatti Chiron, a machine engineered for extreme speed, not endurance, and typically preserved like a museum piece. Spotted at a track day in Spain among pristine multi-million-dollar machines, this single anomaly immediately shattered assumptions about exotic car ownership. Speculation spread rapidly: test mule, development vehicle, or impossible outlier. Yet none of it fully explained the reality. In a world where hypercars are treated as investments first and machines second, this Chiron stood as a contradiction in motion. Every detail raised deeper questions about how and why such a car could reach this mileage, setting off a mystery that would soon challenge the very culture of hypercar ownership itself. The number that broke the hypercar rulebook. Here is the number, stated plainly, because the number alone is the entire story. A Bugatti Chiron, a 1,500 horsepower quad-turbocharged hypercar with a price tag well into 8 figures.
The Bugatti Chiron Supersport has an 8-litre quad-turbo W16, 1,600 horsepower,
was photographed with an odometer reading of roughly 109,000 miles. To put that in perspective, that is more distance than most family sedans cover in a decade of daily commuting, on a car engineered for short, explosive bursts of speed rather than endless highway miles. The photographs came from a respected supercar photographer, taken at a track day event at the Ascari circuit in Malaga, Spain. It was the kind of gathering where multiple hypercars typically show up looking immaculate and barely driven. And, almost as a punchline, one attendee that day arrived in a modest hot hatchback parked among machines worth more than most houses. Surrounded by all of that exclusivity, this particular Chiron stood out for the opposite reason. Every other car in that lot wanted attention, not because it looked pristine and untouched, but because it clearly had not been. Is that not the most unusual thing about extreme wealth and extreme machinery? The assumption has always been that the rarer and more expensive the car, the less it actually gets driven. Hypercars are supposed to be appreciating assets first, transportation second. A 6-figure mileage Chiron complicates that assumption entirely, suggesting that at least one of these machines has been treated less like a museum piece and more like exactly what its engineers built it to be: a car. What made the photos even more striking was the car's condition. Despite the staggering mileage, the cabin and exterior still appeared largely intact, not battered or neglected. That detail mattered because it ruled out the obvious explanation, that this was simply a car that had been driven hard and left to deteriorate. Instead, it looked like a machine that had been driven extensively and still cared for meticulously. Two things that almost never go together once a price tag reaches 8 figures. That contradiction, extreme use paired with careful maintenance, is exactly what turned a single odometer photo into a story big enough to spread across the entire automotive world within days. To understand why this number landed so hard, it helps to understand just how rare any real mileage on a car like this actually is. The Chiron was first revealed in 2016, with customer deliveries beginning in early 2017 and across the years since. The overwhelming majority of examples built have likely traveled only a few thousand miles total.
Bugatti seem affordable. That only costs £2.5 million. Now that's got an 8-litre quad-turbo W16 engine, pumps out 1,500 horsepower.
Occasional weekend drives, the odd appearance at a concours event, long stretches of simply sitting still under a fitted cover. A car engineered to exceed 200 miles per hour, with a price tag that climbs well past $2 million before a single option is added, is almost never treated as daily transportation by the people who actually own one. That rarity is exactly what makes a six-figure mileage reading feel less like a curiosity and more like a genuine anomaly. Somewhere out there, a machine built for short, explosive bursts of acceleration had quietly been living an entirely different life, one far closer to what an engineer originally designed it to handle than what culture and collecting habits typically allow it to actually do. Consider just how much driving 109,000 miles actually represents. Spread evenly, that figure works out to somewhere around 18,000 miles a year since the car first left the factory, a pace that rivals and in some years likely exceeds what an ordinary commuter drives in a daily use sedan. For a car this exclusive, that is not occasional weekend use. That is a vehicle that has spent years functioning as genuine, regular transportation, in a category where genuine, regular transportation almost never happens. And the gap only widens further when measured against the rest of the Chiron lineup specifically. Bugatti has built only a few hundred examples of this particular model across its entire production run, each one individually documented and tracked closely by collectors worldwide. Within a population that small and that closely watched, a single car running this far ahead of every other known example does not simply stand out. It becomes, almost by definition, one of a kind. The mystery before the truth. For weeks, nobody had a real answer. The company that built the car had not publicly confirmed which specific vehicle this was, and the silence only made the speculation louder. The most common theory making the rounds was that this particular Chiron was not a typical customer-owned example at all, but a factory development or test vehicle.
The Chiron is the first production supersports cars in the world that delivers sensational 1500 horsepower.
The kind of car manufacturers use behind the scenes to validate software updates, stress test components, and put real-world wear on a platform before customers ever get behind the wheel. That theory made a certain amount of sense. Automakers have a long history of running prototype and pre-production vehicles far harder than any private owner ever would, precisely because that abuse is the entire point of the exercise. Why does a development car explanation matter so much to enthusiasts? Because it would mean the staggering mileage was never really about one person's driving habits at all. It would simply be the cost of doing business for a brand that needed real data from a real car, accumulated as quickly as possible. Under that theory, the story stays interesting purely as an engineering footnote, evidence that the platform could survive abuse most owners would never risk. But theories are not the same as confirmation. And for a car this exclusive, the internet does not stay patient for long. Enthusiast forums and social media accounts dedicated entirely to tracking unusual exotic car sightings began comparing the photographed chassis against every known example, trying to match paint codes, interior trim, and subtle production details to narrow down exactly which Chiron this actually was. That hunt for an answer is precisely what made the eventual reveal land so much harder than it might have otherwise. This was not simply a footnote buried in a corporate press release. It was the answer to a mystery the entire hypercar community had spent weeks actively trying to solve on its own, which meant that whoever turned out to be behind the wheel was guaranteed an audience the moment the truth finally surfaced. This kind of detective work is not new to exotic car culture, but it rarely gets this much attention. Enthusiast communities have built entire followings around tracking unusual sightings, a rare color combination spotted at a gas station, an unfamiliar modification glimpsed in a parking garage, a chassis number that does not match any known public registry. Most of those mysteries fade quietly once the novelty wears off. This one did not fade, because the number itself kept getting more difficult to ignore the longer it went unexplained. And the timing mattered too. The photos surfaced during a period when conversations about exotic car ownership culture, including growing criticism of collectors who never actually drive what they buy, were already circulating widely online. A genuinely high-mileage Bugatti landing, in the middle of that exact debate, was never going to stay a quiet curiosity for long. It became, almost by accident, the perfect real-world example for an argument enthusiasts had already been having for years. That backdrop also explains why so many people felt personally invested in solving the mystery before any official answer arrived. For an audience that has spent years quietly resenting the idea of seven-figure machines being treated as static investments rather than driving experiences, a Bugatti racking up real, unmistakable mileage was not just an interesting photo.
It's actually the Chiron.
Whoa!
And this is
nice.
the fastest production car on the planet.
It was the rare piece of evidence that the side of the argument favoring actual use might be winning, at least in one very visible case: the man behind the wheel. The answer, when it finally arrived, came not from a press release or an official statement, but from the most direct source possible: the very person responsible for the mileage himself. Mate Rimac, the chief executive of Bugatti Rimac, shared a social media post highlighting two of his own hypercars side by side. That same Chiron, alongside a Rimac Nevera, an all-electric hypercar from the brand he founded before it merged with Bugatti. The Chiron's mileage matched almost exactly what enthusiasts had already been speculating about online. The Nevera, it turned out, had logged tens of thousands of miles of its own. Why would the chief executive of one of the most exclusive car brands on Earth want the world to see numbers like that, rather than quietly keeping them private? Because the message itself was the entire point. In the post, Rimac made his philosophy unmistakably clear, stating simply that he wants his hypercars to be used, not preserved, not stored, used, in the most literal sense of the word, exactly the way an engineer would want to see the machine he helped bring to life actually treated. That philosophy carries extra weight, given who is delivering it. For years, exotic car culture has leaned heavily toward what enthusiasts call the garage queen mentality. Vehicles purchased not to be driven, but to be preserved as appreciating assets, sometimes accumulating only a handful of miles across an entire decade of ownership. Icons capable of commanding eight-figure prices at auction depend almost entirely on that kind of restraint to protect their value. Rimac, running a brand built on exactly that same kind of exclusivity, chose to publicly reject that approach with his own personal cars. Is that not the more surprising story here? Not simply that a hypercar reached an extreme mileage figure, but that the person normally expected to protect that car's value as an asset instead treated it as a tool for understanding what the platform could actually do. With development continuing on the Tourbillon, Bugatti's next-generation successor to the Chiron, every mile logged on this particular car carries real engineering value, turning what looked like simple disregard for resale value into something closer to deliberate hands-on research. It helps to understand exactly who is making this statement. Rimac built his own electric hypercar brand from the ground up, eventually merging it with Bugatti.
Welcome to the Bugatti Tourbillon VP production. VP stands for Validation Prototype. In general, we have three big phases in the development of a car.
To form the company that now carries both names. A rare case of a relatively young engineering-focused entrepreneur ending up in charge of one of the oldest, most tradition-bound names in the entire automotive world. That background matters here, because someone who built a brand on pushing electric performance technology to its absolute limits was never likely to treat ownership the same way a traditional collector might. For Rimac, a car sitting unused in a climate-controlled room is not a symbol of prestige. It is wasted data, wasted insight, and ultimately a wasted opportunity to understand the very engineering he is responsible for advancing. That context reframes the entire mileage figure. This was never simply one wealthy executive indulging a personal habit. It was the person directly responsible for the next generation of Bugatti hypercars choosing to learn from the current one in the most direct way available, by living with it, mile after mile, rather than studying it from a comfortable distance. The public reaction to the reveal split in a way that says plenty about exotic car culture itself. A large portion of enthusiasts responded with genuine admiration, treating the disclosure almost like a folk hero moment. Proof that someone at the very top of the industry shared their own instinct that these machines deserve to be driven hard, not just photographed. A smaller, more traditionally minded segment of collectors reacted with something closer to discomfort, pointing out that decisions like this one can quietly normalize behavior that erodes resale value across an entire market built on scarcity and pristine condition. Both reactions, in their own way, only proved how rare it still is for anyone at this level to make a choice like this one out loud. The real cost of driving a hypercar. Putting this much distance on any car carries a cost. Putting this much distance on a Bugatti carries a cost that sounds almost fictional until the math actually gets laid out. Start with the tires. The Chiron requires specially engineered, bespoke rubber capable of handling extreme speed and the kind of weight that comes with an enormous, all-wheel drive hypercar platform. Across roughly 109,000 miles, replacing that tire set repeatedly could conservatively run well over $150,000. A figure that would buy an entire luxury sedan outright for most drivers, spent here purely on rubber. Then there is routine maintenance. Oil changes alone, scaled across that same mileage, could realistically land in the neighborhood of $275,000. Not because any single service is dramatically overpriced, but because a quad-turbocharged W16 engine demands far more frequent.
This is Bugatti's new 8.3-litre V16 engine that's due to go into the successor to the Chiron.
Far more specialized attention than anything resembling a normal car. Add fuel costs that stretch comfortably into six figures of their own, and the total expense of simply keeping this particular Chiron running starts to rival the purchase price of several ordinary cars combined. Why does anyone willingly absorb that kind of expense on a car that already cost millions to purchase in the first place? Because for someone in Rimaac's position, the cost is not really the obstacle most enthusiasts assume it would be. It is simply the price of genuine, real-world engineering insight. The kind no amount of laboratory testing alone can fully replicate, especially with a successor platform already in development and waiting to benefit from every lesson this car has quietly taught along the way. There is also something almost reassuring buried inside all of that expense. A car capable of absorbing this level of abuse without falling apart, without leaving its driver stranded, without losing the basic integrity of its cabin or bodywork, says something meaningful about the platform underneath all that horsepower. Expensive maintenance is one thing. Catastrophic failure at this mileage would have been an entirely different, far more damaging story. And it never happened. Put the full picture side by side, and the numbers become almost absurd in isolation. Tires alone, replaced repeatedly across this mileage, could cost more than an entire family car. Oil changes across the same distance could cost more than most people spend on housing in a single year. And none of that even accounts for brakes, suspension components, or the inevitable wear that comes with a platform never designed with six-figure mileage in mind in the first place. Added together, simply keeping this Chiron mechanically sound likely exceeds what most drivers will spend on every car they own across their entire lifetime. Yet none of that expense seems to have changed the underlying decision even slightly. For someone with the resources of a hypercar company executive, the cost of using the product the way it was always meant to be used is simply the price of doing the job properly. Proof, if nothing else, that genuine engineering curiosity can outweigh even the most extreme financial deterrent imaginable. It is worth remembering, too, that none of these costs come as a surprise to anyone who buys a car like this in the first place. Even a Chiron driven sparingly, kept almost entirely in storage, still demands specialized servicing, climate-controlled housing, and insurance premiums that dwarf what most households spend on an entire vehicle. The real difference here is not that maintenance suddenly became expensive at 109,000 miles. It is that the expense finally matched the use the car was always built to provide, rather than being paid simply to keep a static asset technically functional inside a private collection. Why this hypercar didn't break. So what does a single high-mileage Chiron actually change in the bigger picture of how the world looks at hypercars? More than it might first appear. For decades, the unspoken rule of ultra-exclusive ownership has been preservation above everything else. Buy the car, store the car, occasionally show the car, and let scarcity do the rest of the work toward protecting its value. This Chiron, and the man who put the miles on it, openly broke that rule in full public view. And the platform did not just survive that treatment, it kept performing at the level its original engineering promised, mile after mile, far beyond what almost any owner would ever attempt. This Chiron is not entirely alone in that distinction either, even if it stands near the very top of it. A Lamborghini Murcielago is believed to have crossed roughly 300,000 miles, spending most of its life as a working rental car for track experience days rather than sitting in a private collection. A Porsche 959 sold at auction in recent years, carrying over 100,000 miles of its own. The pattern across all of these examples is the same.
But there's one car here in particular that's sure to turn some heads.
What we have here is a Porsche 959 Comfort.
Exotic engineering, pushed far harder than its reputation suggests it can handle, somehow still standing at the end of it. What makes this particular case different is the platform behind it. The Chiron is widely regarded as one of the most complex, most expensive machines ever sold to private buyers. And watching it absorb six-figure mileage without major drama recalibrates exactly how durable that kind of engineering actually is. As Bugatti moves toward the tourbillon, the naturally aspirated hybridized successor already waiting in the wings, every mile logged on this Chiron becomes part of the foundation that next car gets built on. The real lesson here has very little to do with one wealthy executive's personal driving habits, and everything to do with what extreme engineering can actually withstand when someone finally has the willingness to test it properly. A garage queen never answers that question. This Chiron just did. There is a broader shift happening underneath this single story too, one that extends well beyond Bugatti specifically. As hypercar ownership has grown increasingly tied to investment strategy rather than pure enthusiasm, a quiet tension has built between the people who buy these cars to drive them and the people who buy them purely to watch their value climb in a climate-controlled room. This Chiron, and the executive willing to put his name on its mileage publicly, represents a small but meaningful counterweight to that trend. Proof that at least one voice at the highest level of hypercar manufacturing,
car manufacturing in London, auto industry, but a lot of that industry is parts. So experts are saying, we really need to focus on those parts manufacturers to support the industry.
Still believes these machines exist to be experienced, not simply owned. Whether that philosophy ever becomes the dominant one in exotic car culture remains an open question. Scarcity and pristine condition will likely always carry real financial value at auction, and most owners will keep making the same calculated decision to protect that value by driving sparingly. But for anyone who has ever wondered what these machines are actually capable of enduring, this particular Chiron just provided a real, mile-by-mile answer, one that no marketing brochure or specification sheet could ever fully replicate. And there is a fitting symmetry in how this story lands right as the next chapter begins. Every uncalled-for mile this Chiron absorbed becomes part of the inherited knowledge baked into the tourbillon's development. whether that was the original intention or simply a useful byproduct of one executive's personal driving habits. Sometimes the most valuable engineering data does not come from a laboratory or a closed test track at all. Sometimes it comes from someone simply refusing to stop driving. 109,000 miles, a six-figure maintenance bill, and a mystery that ended at the desk of Bugatti Rimac's own chief executive. That's the story this hypercar just told the entire world. Most owners protect resale value by never driving these machines at all. He chose the opposite, and the platform held up anyway. That says more about Bugatti's engineering than any spec sheet ever could. If you respect an owner who actually drives his hypercar, hit like right now. Then tell me in the comments, would you ever put real miles on a car like this? And subscribe, because next time, we're breaking down the tourbillon and everything it inherits from this Chiron.